everybody. Welcome to the Psychedelics Today podcast with your host, David Drapkin, having a conversation with Joost Breeksema of the Open Foundation and Icpr. This was a conversation you almost never heard because at the very end of the chat, when we clicked the button, it disappeared. The recording vanished and I had a meltdown and disassociated completely for a few hours. And then some wonderful person in tech support, wherever they were in the world, found in their secret cloud their version of the recording, and they downloaded it and sent it to us. And I was so grateful. So thank you very much, whoever you are. So the chat, revolves a lot around the conference, which is in September. Going to hear a lot about that. I'm not sure I'm going to make it, but the whole team's going to be there. Joe and Kyle and Johanna are especially going to be there. And just to say, Kyle is doing fine. He hasn't been on the podcast for a little while. He wanted to let everyone know he's doing fine. He's just super busy. And obviously we had all of my podcast recordings from the from Research to Reality conference to catch up on from Toronto. It was lovely chatting with Joost about the conference, about the Netherlands and Amsterdam. And I do get a bit personal there, as I tend to do, talking about my two experiences of being in Amsterdam. I got bus rides from Birmingham twice. I think I was 17 the first time, 21 the second time. Both really amazing. The second one, incredibly life-changing. Kind of talk about my experiences of kind of madness. One of my earliest experiences of that. I'm a bit of a veteran nowadays, but that was one of my first tastes of kind of diving into that quagmire and kind of treasure chest as well. And the cultural and societal, political openness, pragmatism of the Netherlands and being kind of welcoming to new ideas and new people, and how that translates into, on some levels, a more progressive drug policy that incorporates harm reduction kind of just as a natural part of, well, that's how people think around here. Like, we care about each other. We want to help you to be safe. We want to kind of listen to science and build systems and support structures just to look after each other. So good to hear. But he does also have some sobering thoughts that it's not, a kind of perfect country where, all policy is enlightened and follows, what psychedelic research suggests. There's still a lot of rigidity there. We also even talk about what it's like having kids and how hard that makes it to go to conferences and festivals and retreats. And so that's something I'm going to hopefully have more conversations around. How can folks with little kids like me kind of still go to these events? So let's see if we can make some new conferences happen that are kid-friendly. And the conference itself, it's one of those that is kind of corporation, private sector, for-profit, light. It is more scientific focused, and it was really nice to understand what that literally translates into on the ground, grassroots, and how the conference will look and feel. So similar to the Toronto conference that I harp on about a lot, I did get to bang my anti-capitalist drum a lot, which I always like to do, but it really sounds like a cool conference. And they did make a day just for business folks to talk about, that business, investment, networking, systems approach. It's the 21st of September, separate ticket. And if you want to go find out, about that, you can get €100 off by using the code TODAY100, 100. That's for the 21st of September, the business day. Or the 21st of September has 3 workshops you may want to go to in their conference. It's breathwork, music or psychotherapy, and you'll hear a lot about all 3 of those. The actual conference itself is September 22nd to 24th. And the code for that to get €150 off those main days is TODAY150. All right, so I think I'll just dive straight into Joost's bio. So Joost Breeksema is the Executive Director of the Open Foundation. Founded in 2007, the Amsterdam-based non-profit organization has been on the forefront, advocating psychedelic research and therapies. He also directs the organization of the Interdisciplinary Conference on Psychedelic Research, hence Icpr. It's Europe's longest-running conference on psychedelics, which will return to Amsterdam from the 21st to the 24th of September. Icpr focuses on high-quality scientific psychedelic research research, therapeutic innovations, and critical engagement around ethics, policy, the psychedelic industry boom, and more. Joost is a philosopher and qualitative researcher. For his PhD at the Department of Psychiatry at UMCG, he interviewed patients about their treatment experiences with ketamine, psilocybin, and MDMA, aiming to deepen our understanding of the therapeutic mechanisms and the role of setting and support. Underlying all of his work is a deep-seated belief in the scientifically grounded, responsible, and ethical integration of psychedelics that respects the multiplicity of other non-medical approaches. He advocates critical, collaborative, open, and transparent approaches in science and beyond. Enjoy the show, everyone. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Psychedelics Today. Having a wonderful chat, I hope, with Joost Breeksema from Icpr in the wonderful Netherlands. How are you doing, Joost?
Hey, David. Great to be here. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, really happy we got this time to chat. Where are you? Because you're surrounded by plants and tons of books.
Yes, I'm in my home office on the outskirts of Amsterdam, on the very final street of Amsterdam, to be precise, in the Netherlands, indeed.
The final street. What does that mean?
Well, there's a bunch of final streets, I suppose, but you walk out 50 meters outside of my street and you've left the city boundaries of Amsterdam. So I'm on the very edge of the city. And
what goes outside of there? What's on the edge? Is it forest? Is it another town? Or
yeah, there's a little nature reserve. So it's one of the perks of living here. You can just walk outside and within 5 minutes you're surrounded by trees and water and birds. So it's a nice little place, nice little slice of Amsterdam.
Beautiful. Any canals around where you are?
Oh, we're in the Netherlands, man. There's water everywhere. It's hard to escape it.
Yeah, I'm actually from Birmingham in England, and I lived on a canal boat for a little while. And the one famous thing about Birmingham is it has more canals than Venice.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's literally the one interesting statistic. But yeah, Amsterdam is a really special place. So I hope we can kind of tap into the energy that is there. Before we go into that, could you just tell the listeners who you are, Joost, personally and professionally speaking, please?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so my name is Joost Breeksema. I am almost 40 years old. I am a philosopher by trade, and I have basically two hats that are relevant for this conversation. But I'm also a father of two kids. I play capoeira, and I do a lot of things related to psychedelics. So my two hats include that of a researcher. So I conduct qualitative research at the Department of Psychiatry at the University Medical Center in Groningen, in the north of the Netherlands, 2 hours away from Amsterdam. And I am the executive director of the Opium Foundation, which is a non-profit organization dedicated to advocating scientific and clinical research into psychedelics in the Netherlands and Europe since 2007.
Yeah. And how does the Opium Foundation fit in with the Icpr conference that's coming up in September?
Yeah, so we have been organizing conferences as part of through Open since 2010. We've been organizing lectures and other educational meetings since our foundation, which was in 2007. So since then, we've organized several conferences, and this will be the 5th really big international conference on psychedelic research and therapies. So the Open is the organization that makes it possible.
Got it. And yes, Psychedelics Today is a sponsor there, and really looking forward to quite a lot of the team are going to be there. I think 5 of us are going. I can't get time off from the kids, but yeah, I think there's 4 or 5 of us that are going to be there. So it's going to be amazing.
You're going to miss out on this one, David.
Oh, God.
I think it will be amazing.
I know. Who knows? Yeah, maybe I'll try and make something happen. We'll see. But yeah, it looks wonderful.
It's going to be a special one for us, as well, because the previous conference that we tried to put together in 2020 was first postponed. And then in the end, we had decided we were forced to do it online. So finally for us, this gives us a chance to put an in-person conference together again, which we've been, many people have been craving. We'd been craving putting together like a physical conference, meeting people in person, networking, getting together, creating a great atmosphere, which was nice. It was nice to do it online as well. It was a new experience, but I don't think there's anything that beats an actual conference.
Yes, there's something special about a psychedelic conference as well. I have to say, it really is an amazing energy, just wonderful people there. And particularly when you focus on the science and the research, it's just fantastic what people are finding out and looking into, and the questions that they're asking to try and say, well, what's going on here in the brain? Or when we change this variable, what happens, and combining different treatment protocols together. It's just incredible. So I guess one thing I wanted to just start with, you just said you're a philosopher. That's one of you wear a philosopher's hat, I guess you're saying there. Can you talk a wee bit about what kind of philosophy or what questions or what kind of experiences from that philosophical angle most interest you?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one of the topics that most interests me, that I'm not currently studying myself, because my background is in philosophy, and I did research into mystical experiences and mystical experiences induced by psychedelics. And that is my perspective when I do research. But one of the things that I'm very interested in is answering trying to understand some of the really hard questions in science, like the frontiers of science. So how can we understand consciousness? How can we use psychedelics as tools to study consciousness? Can this tell us anything about ontology, like the nature of reality, or the nature of knowledge, epistemology? And we have like a brilliant speaker that I think that's one of the speakers that I'm most looking forward to seeing, who's an outspoken proponent of the idea of metaphysical idealism, which is the idea that consciousness is the basis or the foundation of reality, and that materialism comes out of consciousness. His name is Bernardo Kastrup. He's a physicist, quantum physicist, and a philosopher also. And he's just a very, very smart cookie, a very interesting guy. He's very well read, and he has very pronounced ideas about the use of psychedelics in consciousness research. So this is one of the topics that I find super interesting.
Go on. Yes. So keep going. Let's assume that we're with you so far, Joost.
Okay, good.
When we're talking about consciousness and kind of metaphysics and what happens in psychedelic experiences, transpersonal states of consciousness, do you have any theories yourself or any experiences yourself that have helped you to develop meaning and understanding of you, of life itself, of our amazing planet? And I have to just say as well, quick snippet, they just released the photos today of the Webb telescope from NASA.
I saw them.
Oh, so, for example, how do you apply a sense of like you being there in your house there in Amsterdam and me here in New Jersey, and we're talking on a microphone, and they're releasing these pictures of thousands of galaxies that is an equivalent to a grain of sand, and our consciousness, in a sense, I think as well is also of that nature. Like, so I'm curious.
Hard to comprehend, right? Yes, 4.6 billion years old light. It's incredible. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the this concept of vastness and of relativity, I think that's something that you can get out of psychedelics as well, and that some people find actually very meaningful. And I said before, I'm also conducting qualitative research, including into the experiences of people who are treated with ketamine for very hard to treat depression. And some of these people, even though ketamine in our university hospital used to be offered as a standalone pharmacological treatment, so no real preparation, no real support, no integration. And regardless, some people had experiences of the infinity of mind, of their consciousness, and the relativity of everything. And for some people, this was very frightening. They found it anxiety-inducing, and they thought everything was meaningless. But other people, on the other hand, they also were able to see the relativity of their own negativity, of their own thoughts, of their own problems. In the grand scheme of things, maybe they didn't matter that much. And it's amazing if you just use those experiences and allow people to explain them and to talk to you about them. You can actually make use of that and explore the therapeutic potential of those experiences much more than we at least did in our university center, which is, I think, exemplary of the way most places administer ketamine. I mean, there are exceptions, I think, particularly in the US, where people do ketamine-assisted psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the large majority of places offering ketamine treatment, they offer it as basically as an antidepressant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of, I think, I have to be honest in saying there's a lot of pushback coming now around antidepressants and even CBT and traditional methods of mental health treatment. That paradigm doesn't really fit our society anymore, or what we know about consciousness, what we know about community, what we know about kind of epistemology as well, and people's experiences of existential crisis and spiritual emergence. And this psychedelic kind of medicine therapy paradigm expands the container kind of infinitely, limitlessly. So what's your sense of what you're perhaps seeing or would like to see more of around how psychedelic therapy and medicine research connects with people's experiences of their own life meaning, mortality, consciousness, and expansiveness?
Well, this is my personal perspective, but this is, I think, one of the areas that are most interesting, most intriguing about psychedelic treatments, is that they confront people with their own existence, with their place in the universe, with how they relate to themselves and to others. And that's something, I think, as you said beautifully, it's something that distinguishes psychedelic treatments from basically all conventional treatments. And I mean, there's no comparison really to, cognitive behavioral therapy or antidepressants, which are mostly used to, reduce people's symptoms, as important as that may be. But these are, when treated properly, these are experiences or treatments that really force people to think about the meaning of life, the meaning of their own existence, their relations in the world. And it's funny. I'm involved in a process in the Netherlands where we try to bring all the stakeholders in the mental health treatment program on board to make sure that when psychedelics do become registered, that we have everything in place, from professional associations to healthcare insurers to government bodies to ministries, regulatory agencies, pharmaceutical industry, everybody who plays a role in rolling out treatments and certifying treatments. And some of the people are very hesitant in talking about a paradigm shift in mental health care. But if you think about it, it really is a different approach to treating people's ailments. Like instead of helping people learn to deal with their shortcomings, or reducing symptoms that bother them, it really goes to the core of individual and communal suffering. And I think there's a huge potential there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why psychedelic medicine and therapy can't fit within the container, the paradigm of what we are used to, because it ultimately and inherently kind of breaks down all of those assumptions and just the superficial layer of life that I think we tend to live on. There is no going back, and it can be very scary. It can be like a crisis of meaning and what happens next, and how do I understand what to make of that experience and who I am. And so, yeah, it does need a lot of systems change. So I love that you're bringing all those different stakeholders together. I also love that you're a philosopher doing this. Like in a lot of countries, people are like, what? You're a philosopher? Well, what are you doing here then? Go write some books or poems, But I love that what you're doing there, you're conceptualizing, the meaning of healing and of health and of what does the actual community need? Like, what are people saying? And that qualitative research of what ketamine in particular is doing to people. And then saying, well, if that's going to be happening 10,000 times a day throughout this country, are we ready for that? Are our systems, are our training, are our, policies, our regs, can we kind of contain that? So what's the answer to that question that you're finding, and how are you going to move forwards with that tricky thing?
I think my answer would be no, we're not really ready for that. And I think this is again, one of the topics that I think we should, or that we will discuss at Icpr, is exactly this practical question of scalability. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. I am indeed a philosopher, and philosophers are most known for, being in their ivory tower and reading and writing and conceptualizing. But this is hands-on work. This is lobbying and advocating and bringing people together and really thinking about the nuts and bolts of integrating innovation in healthcare. And we're by no means anywhere close to finding a solution. But I find myself in the position of advocating caution as well, because I think one of the main risks right now is of scaling up too quickly, too soon, and without having the infrastructure ready, without having the training and the supervision, the sufficient supervision needed to be able to make sure that these treatments land well. So I'm much more of the approach that it's better to grow slowly and steadily than to have this huge boom, and then with all the risks that come with it.
Yeah, that's really important. And when we start to talk about the conference, let's definitely go down the line of the role of money and capitalism and kind of VC and kind of pay to play, and are we ready to kind of expedite this, fast track it, as a system? But for now, I wanted to just say I did a bit of research on you, Joost, and a quote came up from our friend Floris at Blossom. You said, "I still think that psychedelics have huge potential, but I think it's good to have a proper balance between hype and hope." I find that really hard to get the balance because, I've been working in mental health, 15 years, and it's not very great success rates. It really isn't the Band-Aid approach. So I'm desperate to extrapolate my personal experience of cannabis and psychedelics and how they've helped me and helped people I know in my life, into the big picture. But the system's not quite ready for it, and who is going to own this piece? So how do you go about balancing hype and hope in the way that you talk, and in maybe the way that the conference itself is going to be presented?
Yeah, it's something I think that we've had to deal with since the beginning of Open. So from the very start, we were approached by people with serious mental health care problems who had read about psychedelics, who had read results. And this has been a constant since for 15 years now. And we've always been very cautious about offering opportunities or leading people to, because there are also in the Netherlands, there are underground therapists as well. And this is a risk when we talk to the clinical researchers here in the Netherlands as well. They struggle with this also. So, for example, if you do a trial with psilocybin or MDMA and people get a single dosing session or 2 dosing sessions, and they feel they've gotten somewhere, but they're not quite there yet, and they really feel like they need an additional session or they need more therapy, but that's not included in the study protocol.
Yeah.
So what do you do? What is your ethical responsibility as a therapist then? Do you give patients a hint, or you might, I know this person, and then leave me out of it, but you could go there, or you could do a truffle ceremony with an unlicensed guide, good as they may be, or do you not offer anything and then perpetuate people's suffering, or not give them the opportunity to wrap up a process that's been started? And this is a super tricky balance.
Yeah.
But I do try to keep the long distance view, or that I try to keep the end goal in mind, which is, for me at least, the safe and sustainable integration of psychedelic treatments and psychedelic experiences in our community. And I think if what is needed is to go slow, then it's maybe a little bit more important to go a little bit slower and get it right than helping individuals right now. But this is an ethical dilemma that there has no clear solution. But I'm just very wary of the potential of things going wrong if you have well-intentioned individuals that are inadequately prepared. There's no infrastructure in place to help people if they do decompensate or if they do stabilize after being treated with psychedelics, and there is nobody to help them through that process. Then I think the risk of all these developments being halted again is still real. I don't think it's less real now than it was in the 60s. Even though the research is better, the how we got there is as much more solid than it was in the late 50s, early 60s, but there is still a real risk. And I think our perspective, yours is probably the same as mine. We're very deeply embedded and surrounded by people doing research, being involved in clinical treatments, and working for NGOs, training future therapists, educating people. We're kind of in a bubble, right? And I think the perspective from people outside of that, and especially people who are a little bit more on the conservative side, not just politically, but just erring on the side of caution, their perspective is probably a little different. And I think it's very important to be very sober and very rigorous in how we approach this topic.
And where are things at the moment in the Netherlands around kind of governmental policy regulation, and what are some of the intentions within the places of power about what needs to change around psychedelic research and drug policy?
Yeah, so this is with regards to psychedelics. We have different drug policies for different substances. I'm not sure if you know. I can give you a little snapshot of the context. So we've since the 70s in the Netherlands, we've pioneered harm reduction approaches, and this has worked really well for people consuming more addictive substances, heroin, cocaine, crack cocaine. We've always had a very pragmatic, public health oriented view. We've never criminalized drug use or drug users. And as a result, we have, I think, probably the lowest prevalence of heroin users in all of Europe. We have no HIV related to drug use in the Netherlands. And the same is true for recreational use as well. So drug use in the Netherlands is not criminalized, so you cannot get a criminal record for using drugs. And we even have a system in place, a countrywide system, where you can get your illegally bought drugs tested. So if you go on the street, you go to a party, to a rave, you buy an ecstasy tablet, or just even from the comfort of your own home, as people do nowadays, you can just take it to a testing service. They will have it tested for you. They will quantify and qualify the substances in your tablet, and then they will give you health advice on how to use it, on how not to use it. And that really, goes a long way in informing and educating people about safe drug use practices. And in fact, just recently, so they are very cautious about, advocating health risks. Only recently they sometimes issue alerts. We recently had an alert about liquid MDMA, which was going around apparently, which was incredibly highly dosed, which was impossible to dose properly. So then they inform the public, say there's risks of using this specific pill or this specific liquid, but otherwise it's really a public health oriented approach towards drug use. And then legally, especially I think the case of psilocybin is particularly interesting. So we have our Opium Act, which is our national drug law, which is based on the UN conventions. So all the substances in the UN conventions on drug use are included in our Opium Act, including psilocybin, which is list 1, which is the strictest list, which contains heroin and cocaine and MDMA and LSD, all the harmful and less harmful substances. And then we have psilocybin containing mushrooms, which are on list 2, which is the same list as cannabis, which is a little less severe. It's less severely enforced. And then we have psilocybin containing truffles, which are completely unregulated. So there is the same substance, which is classified in 3 different ways in our legal system. And this has allowed, I think, since probably 4, 5, 6 years, the emergence of all kinds of retreat centers, psychedelic guides, working with truffles for people wanting to use truffles in a safe environment for personal growth, for spiritual exploration, to have safe ceremonies in the Netherlands. And that is because they're unregulated, and these guides, they try to regulate themselves. There's an organization dedicated to, forming ethical principles, safety protocols around the use of psilocybin truffles. So that is, our law enforcement authorities, they don't see this as a priority at all. Psychedelics are a minor thing. They don't really care about it at all. I think the same is true for ayahuasca, which used to be legal until a few years ago, when our High Court issued another statement saying that even religious freedom wasn't an exemption anymore for the use of ayahuasca under the ayahuasca churches, but it's very rarely enforced, because I think law enforcement also in the Netherlands is pragmatic, and they have larger priorities around drug use.
This is a really important point, and I wanted to definitely just talk about what it's like there. What does it feel like? Because I know what it feels like to live in many countries where psychedelics and cannabis are Schedule 1, illegal, criminalized. If you get caught, you really do get in trouble. Particularly if you don't have white skin, then you're much more likely to get arrested and imprisoned. And that affects our relationship with the medicine, and it affects our experience of actually using the medicine in that space. Like, where do we get it from? Do we know what's in it? Where do we take it? Who do we tell? Are we safe? And then if I need help, where do we go? And so there is something over here in America called the Fireside Project, which is a harm reduction helpline. That's awesome. And so that, I know people are using that when they are kind of freaking out a little bit, or they're not, just need someone to talk to. And they're going to be there. But in the Netherlands, it just sounds like it's more grown up, not quite so racist as over here in America, but just a bit more grown up, more like, that book by Dr. Carl Hart, kind of drug use for grown ups. So it's, you're going to use this because humans have been doing this for hundreds of years. And the Netherlands is a melting pot that's open to, just entrepreneurialism and egalitarianism. So it's like, it really makes sense why that kind of level of consciousness in the Netherlands would be more conducive to putting harm reduction into practice, and not just kind of keeping it in these dark alleyways, but let's actually put this into policy and into services. So I imagine that helps you to feel more relaxed and not persecuted, and
yeah, for sure,
keeps you safe.
I really think it does. Yeah, and I think one of the key reasons for decriminalizing drug use is that it would demarginalize people. This is like the foundation of our drug policy for over 40 years. This was one of the key insights that they had when they formulated our drug policy, is that it's not drug use per se that leads to more harmful drug use. It's being marginalized and being criminalized that puts people quite literally to the margins of the city. If you're not allowed to be in public intoxicated or using, you find dark corners, and you also quite literally, and you more easily come into contact with people who probably also do other things that are that need to be done in the shadows. And that the idea was that pushes people to the margins and leads them to progressing from relatively harmless drug use to more harmful drug use. And that policy has been in place since, for almost 50 years now. And that's why I said, we have very low, like the prevalence of people who use crack cocaine or heroin or other more risky substances is much lower than in other countries, because it's been, if it's open, you can also discuss it, and you can also discuss the risks much more openly. And I think that is, it is more normalized. And for some people that's a negative, but for me, it's a positive, because it allows you also to educate and to inform and to prepare people for what they're doing.
Beautiful. God, I really want to come to this conference. It really just feels so special to be doing it there, because it is, the Netherlands really is doing things differently to America, where 100,000 people died of overdoses. And, even though there's billions of dollars of being made in cannabis and kind of pouring into ketamine clinics, there's still tens of thousands of people in prison and being arrested today for using cannabis and psychedelics.
And it's the mind-boggling thing is that it's completely unnecessary. One of the things that we have in place are like safe consumption rooms, supervised injection facilities, needle and syringe exchange programs. Many people who die of an overdose die because they're alone, and they're alone because of the reasons you outlined earlier. Because you cannot share this with everyone. You have to be afraid that you're being arrested or being picked up. And so if you do this by yourself, if you do have an overdose, I mean, having an opioid overdose is reversible. There's cheap and available medicine that can help you revert an opioid overdose of oxycodone, of hydromorphone, of heroin, morphine, whatever. It's available and it's cheap. And if people just use in a supervised facility, I think that the number of overdoses would have been so much lower. And there is like a bunch of very easy things to implement that you can do that will save people's lives that are not being done for, ideological or political reasons. And those don't exist in the Netherlands in relation to drug policy for the most part.
So ultimately, you're saying that in the Netherlands, government and policy prioritizes health and safety above political ideology.
For the most part, for sure. Yes.
You're right. It's not perfect. Yeah. And just thinking about, coffee shops and smoking cannabis and buying cannabis there. And they're starting to open up here in New Jersey where I live, smoking lounges. I think they're going to be called. I think they've given 9 licenses out. So you can go and smoke there and even, buy food there. And New York's got 3 kind of restaurants that can serve cannabis infused meals as well. So, we're starting to see how it's part of culture. And hopefully that will ingrain in people that just to use it responsibly and it's not like this thing to be ashamed of, that you can smoke or have edibles and have conversation and listen to music and just have a night out with friends. And it's not something that should be ashamed or a high risk thing to do to break the law. Yeah,
for sure. And this is actually one of the areas in which the Netherlands is lagging a little bit behind now, because our coffee shop policy has been in place since the second half of the 70s. And there's been no change in that. So our supply side is still completely unregulated. This is completely controlled by the criminal market. This is still also actively persecuted. There's no quality control. And I think like the United States, at least several states, are way ahead of the Netherlands so far. But also in terms of normalization, I think that's one thing that we have done right. So I do give lectures on drug policy, and particularly when there are groups of American students, I like to take them to a coffee shop in the city center of Amsterdam. And it's just seeing who frequents the coffee shop. It's everybody. It's from construction workers to lawyers to unemployed people, young people, old people, men, women, everybody, all colors, everybody attends. It's not a subcultural thing. It's just people who enjoy using cannabis as people enjoy, drinking coffee or drinking beers or whatever their drug of choice is. The same is true for cannabis, and it's not a frowned upon thing, I think, for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had 2 journeys to Amsterdam when I used to live in England. I think the first one I was probably 18. Didn't have a clue what I was doing there. I was petrified most of the time with my mates. And then, I think when I was 21, and actually that second trip, I just had a near-death experience like a week before when I was electrocuted and nearly died. And I was having like a huge meaning of life, existential crisis, and switched from being an economist to basically a counselor, therapist, hippie. And then I went to Amsterdam literally the next week. And I did have a spiritual emergence and a little bit of kind of what I would call madness come up. And one of my friends as well, he ended up actually having bipolar disorder, and we didn't know at the time, but he had a really strong reaction to mushrooms and cannabis, and later on, did end up in inpatient hospitals in England a few times. And so I'm just sensing Amsterdam, there's definitely risks to this. You need to have information like how much mushrooms to take, who to be with, what might happen, and how to kind of put yourself back together again if you kind of really open up and have, psychological trauma and kind of defragmentation, which is kind of part of the process. Like we need to, fall apart a little bit to be able to then see what's underneath all those layers and shells that we kind of just lay on top of and never kind of melt beyond. But it's, so I'm just kind of waxing about how much I love Amsterdam. It really helped me in my life. And maybe let's move on to the conference, less about me. So I want to just ask off with a question. So last time you did a physical conference in Amsterdam was 2016, yeah?
Correct.
So that is a fucking long time in the world of psychedelics. That's a
different world.
Oh my God, we've gone from black and white to full color, technicolor now. So in 6 years, the entire psychedelic global landscape has completely transformed for good and
Very
for
true.
bad. And so how is this 2022 conference, which is going to be, let's check the way those dates are, 22nd to 24th, with quite a few things on the 21st as well of September. So how is that going to differ from 2016 when it was all black and white and the whole world of psychedelics was totally different? Just paint a little picture. How do you think it's going to look and feel, and how have you designed it differently because of all the changes?
Yeah, I think one of the most important. Yeah, it does. You're absolutely right. It's a different world. It's a different ecosystem. And I think one of the major changes that we've made for this year is that we've added on an extra day before the conference to talk about these developments. We've called this Science, Ethics, and Business. And this will really go into detail about, how these different fields interact and intersect and connect, the field of academic research. Because in 2016, the conference was focused on high quality scientific, scholarly, interdisciplinary research. So research from different scientific fields, clinical research, but really just academic and clinical. And now in 2022, and for the past few years, we've all seen, all these investors, entrepreneurs, biotech startups come into the field, and how these fields intersect, the business side, the science side, and how to make sure that we can steer all these developments in a direction that is still based on optimal patient care, on ethical values, on ensuring that these treatments eventually become accessible, can be paid by the public health system. I know this is probably a little bit different in the United States because the way your health system is organized, but at least in the Netherlands and in most of Europe, the adaptation of these treatments will depend on whether health insurers will pay for it, and that will be determined by the national healthcare system. Will they allow these treatments? So a large part of this conference will be dedicated to discussing what does, for example, what does this mean if researchers consult for psychedelic companies? There's many prominent researchers in the field who also act on the advisory board of different psychedelic companies. How does this influence their research, their data? What are different strategies around getting intellectual property or patenting or not patenting? We've seen some very interesting examples. This is also just a completely new field. Patent lawyers all of a sudden having a say in this field, and producing very interesting articles around some of the practices. Some of the standard practices probably in patenting healthcare innovations, but that are completely new for psychedelics. And you have to wonder if people involved in psychedelics, because I've been in this field for 15 years, are they really prepared to deal with people whose interests, who come from a very different perspective, who come from the business world, who come from the investment world, and who may have very different ideas about what is important. And are you able to interact with them and secure your own independence and your own authority and your credibility in this field?
Yeah.
So, and more practically also, what does that mean? What does it mean in terms of business models? What are some of the potential business models? Is it all about shareholder value? Are there different models possible? There are some nonprofit organizations, there are public benefit or purpose economy organizations, in addition to the more common business ventures. So what are the possibilities, and what are the right options for the psychedelic industry, or the psychedelic industrial complex, as I've heard somebody say it, which is a term I find quite funny and also weird. I don't think 3 years ago we would have been possible to have this conversation, but it's here, and it has to be reckoned with.
Yeah, I've a few times over the last, say, year or two, been listening to Jamie Wheel talking about that psychedelic industrial complex, and very eloquent, and it's kind of scary, what he is saying about the role of late stage capitalism and the corporate entities coming into this space.
Yeah, he's very eloquent on this. I agree.
Yeah. And it makes me think that now in 2022, all of these different players that maybe were a bit fragmented, now we're all together, kind of in a sense fighting over the narrative, fighting over ownership, but we're also trying to bridge the divides and the suspicions and the the inequality that we are now seeing, because there is a pay-to-play reality in the psychedelics world, just like there is in every world in capitalism, because that's kind of the paradigm we live in, unfortunately. Kind of, I call it hyper-capitalism that we live in. There's always been capitalism, even like the tulip, craze in Amsterdam in the 17th century. That was...
Yeah, it was like the Bitcoin of the 17th century.
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? It really was. Yeah, tulips bulbs going for like $10,000 equivalent to today's prices. So I think hypercapitalism is a scary entity, particularly in the age of climate change, nuclear weapons, and all of those pieces. So I'm thinking that right now, all of these different vested interests and micro communities are all kind of being pushed together at conferences, on social media, when it comes to, building out the infrastructure, policies and regulations. And no one really is owning that. And it should not be that the people with the most money do own that. So here's a question for you, Joost. How did you and the Open Foundation team try to articulate the concepts of ethics and the vision that you had around the principles of who should be involved, who should be spotlighted, and what kind of criteria they would need to meet in order to do that? Because some conferences, you got $10,000. You can sponsor everything. You can put your logo here. When someone flushes the toilet, that's your logo that's going to flush out. I'm making a joke, but literally, your logo will be everywhere. You can say anything, and but who are they? And what does it mean to actually give them all of that visibility and attention? So I'm just interested, how did you do that? And, Psychedelics Today is a platinum sponsor, but that doesn't mean we get to be, on stage saying, hey, look at us. And we're not. We're just going there just to schmooze and network and we'll have a table where we'll give people information, but it doesn't buy us anything, because that's not who we are. We don't want to buy people's attention. And so how did you do that? What was your guiding principle, the kind of ethical vision there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think this has been very interesting for me to witness, because I think this was the first. So for all previous conferences, we decided to only have non-profit sponsors and to just stay independent of all commercial interests on purpose, just because we think it's really important to remain independent, to have an autonomous voice in this field. And so, but this time, for the first time, we considered also having for-profit sponsors, provided that we can agree with their business models, for as far as you can really assess that. But what we always communicated is that our decision to accept an organization as a sponsor is completely independent from their participation in the program. And I think we soon found that the only thing that, or the thing that most most organizations were interested in is being on stage and promoting their conference. And that's something we were not prepared to offer them. That's, as you say, pay to play. That doesn't fly with us. I think it's really important to, if you want to promote this field properly and to have critical discussions, you have to curate the program on your own terms. And that's what we've always done. And I think you lose out on commercial opportunities, and you lose out on bigger sponsorships that way. But I stand behind it. I think we decide ourselves what the program should be like and who can be involved in the program. And if we decide to invite somebody who is, who also has a commercial interest, that's fine, but on our own terms. And because we think that will add something to the conversation. And we have done it a little bit more in the science, ethics, and business symposium, because you do need to have players or actors from different perspectives, and to have an open, transparent but critical conversation about, how all these different forces shape this field and how we can steer it in the right direction. But it's different from just giving people a podium and allowing them to present whatever they want to present. I think you always need, a very highly curated program and good moderators to, have the conversation on your own terms. And that's what we always try to do.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And it's similar to Horizons over here. They don't do pay to play, and they kind of really just do invite only for moderators and presenters and panelists, and just based on, merit, scientific, social, cultural, political merit. What message do people need to hear? What conversations need to be had? And a couple of minutes ago, you were really just churning out lots of very complex questions that we are currently facing around, the psychedelics and kind of what evolution that we see over the next few years. One conversational piece that we are grappling with collectively, I think, is diversity, inclusion, reciprocity, of how to kind of engender that within our perspectives of working and of interaction and of building out our companies and infrastructure. So could we just touch on that piece around diversity, inclusion, reciprocity, and how you navigated that piece with ICPR this year?
Yeah, good. Yeah, it's a good point. I think this has always been a challenging. This has always been a challenge for us as conference organizers, because on the one hand, we're a nonprofit, we're a mostly volunteer-run organization, and we're dependent on ticket sales to sell the conference. And as a result, some of the people you want to put on your program first are the names that people recognize and that will make them like, oh, I know this person, this is interesting, I want to see them. And as it so happens to be, many of those are, established, older white men. So in order to keep diversity, I think we do manage really well to keep diversity in terms of gender, because I think there's also a gender bias in research, in clinical practice in general. And psychedelics are definitely not an exclusion. We're not special in that way. We're not colorblind or gender blind or something, as much as some people would like to believe that it is the case. But actually in 2020, we paid a lot of attention to including, to making the conference diverse in terms of having indigenous perspectives in the conference as well. And I noticed I really, really tried hard, and we all tried hard to bring people to the table and have a discussion that is based on equal values. And, bringing people over from their communities in Colombia or Brazil or Peru or Mexico to the conference, and then having a conversation that is equally worthwhile to them as it is to the Western audience, and to, bridge the gap between how you talk, how you understand the world, what your worldview, what your cosmological view, how do you bridge the different languages of science and of practice, medicinal practice, and in ways of understanding the world and the environment that are very different. And I thought I still think that's very important to have, but I also realized that to do it justice, to do it properly justice, you need to do it really, really right. And I think it's an event in itself. I think one of the few organizations that managed to do this really well are Chacruna, based run by Biela Bach. I think they have a foot in both worlds, both in Western science and in indigenous practices. So for this year, we decided to focus more on including therapists, clinical perspectives on the one hand, and patient perspectives on the other hand, because I think that's another way of promoting diversity that is really, really important in order to, evolve treatments, evolve clinical study designs that are focused much more on the needs and in the perspectives of participants and patients than is most commonly done. So that's one way we try to promote more diversity in this field. But there's no denying that we are a relatively I mean, this field is still relatively white and Western centered. Unfortunately, it's a reality, but I do think we've managed to bring a nice diversity of perspectives. Also in terms of disciplines, which is another way of diversifying. It's not just clinical research, it's not just neuroscience, but it's also anthropology and sociology and history and philosophy.
Beautiful. Oh God, I like how you're approaching it. The multidisciplinary approach is key, and again, you can't do that when money is calling the shots, because when money's pay to play and whoever wants to get up on stage with the biggest wallet, then it doesn't matter what profession they are, what traditions they have, and the indigenous voices definitely won't have a seat at the table, and it's not likely to be diverse and inclusive if the VCs are kind of controlling everything. So I think keeping money on the side then lets you say, okay, let's bring all these different players coming from different perspectives, different professions, different countries, the traditional indigenous and the kind of Western clinical scientific, bring them together. Let's have these complex conversations together. And I have to say, I went to the From Research to Reality conference in Toronto a couple months back. I keep talking about it because there was no money, no for-profit corporate involvement there. And they really did have a lot of amazing collaborative discussions between diverse stakeholders. And they had a lot of inclusion of indigenous, traditional, cultural experts from South America, but also North America, so First Nations and Native American people. And that was really beautiful because it was not just talking about, and then there was this big crew of the Imperial College gang that were there, like 5 or 6 of them, and it was great to have them, geniuses, professors, assistant professors, focusing on neuroimaging and all of these kind of DNA stuff. And then you've got they had a chief, I think, from one of the First Nation tribes, giving blessings in his language and talking more about the cosmology of the moon and the stars and the kind of the spirit, and have those people in the same room chatting with each other. Both of them are right, but they're just seeing it from different angles and perspectives. And that wouldn't happen if these sponsors are just throwing their money around. That conversation just wouldn't happen. Like, no one's going to pick up on that. So I think that's really important. Are there any conversations that you're really looking forward to? Any presenters or kind of panel discussions? And if don't worry about seeming too geeky, like if it's just about very particular nuance, like what really kind of tickles your fancy, Joost?
There are, I think, a lot of, I don't know where to start really, but there are some really interesting innovations in clinical research that I'm super excited to learn more about, such as the first results of new clinical trials looking at DMT or 5-MeO DMT for the treatment of depression, which this can potentially be a huge benefit, short-acting psychedelics that are nonetheless very intense and very hard to grasp and to make sense of, and very deep, profound metaphysical experiences that they induce, and how they can be harnessed to, help people with depression. And then particularly if people have no frame of reference around, having their sense of self disappear and be merged into the large void, and then returning within 15 minutes and then goodbye. So what does that look like? I'm super excited to see what can come out of that. And in addition, we'll have some results from new trials in Switzerland on LSD for the treatment of people with terminal illnesses. We touched upon this a little bit before, right? On existential issues for people who have severe somatic diseases or terminal illnesses. Bill Richards will talk a little bit about that as well, or plenty about it probably. And there's some novel substances, novel indications. We have different people talking about methylone, which is it's a compound very similar to MDMA. It's beta ketone MDMA, which is not MDMA. It's a different compound that has a little bit different mode of action for the treatment of depression or PTSD. So that's interesting. This is one of the substances actually that were sold before they were illegal in the Netherlands in smart shops, the places that also sell psilocybin truffles. So there was a little bit of a recreational scene around this in the Netherlands 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's now being developed as a psychedelic medicine. And then, someone will talk about, these are the folks at Yale who've studied psilocybin for the treatment of headaches, cluster headaches, migraines, which I think is going to be a very, very important development in the future. I mean, a lot of the clinical work has been focused on mental disorders, and I think there's a huge potential for the treatment of specific pain disorders as well.
Yes.
So that's I mean, yeah, those are on the clinical side that I'm very enthusiastic about. And what I am particularly looking forward to this one, or this we'll have something every day around more experiential. And what you alluded to before, you said, psychedelic conferences are special, and I agree. There's a special atmosphere at conferences, and ours is really no different. And for that reason, we've always steered away a little bit from psychedelic culture. So our conferences are really focused on, high quality scientific scholarly science, because the atmosphere will be good nonetheless. You don't need to have a whole room filled with psychedelic visionary artwork or happenings around it. As much as I enjoy and appreciate them, but I think for at least from our perspective, we've always tried to be strict in separating the science part from the cultural part, just because it's easier for people to understand and to accept if it's just science. But this year we'll have a panel on psychedelics and aesthetics. There's like different scholarly perspectives on aesthetics from a neuroscience perspective, from a cultural historical perspective, from a media studies perspective. We'll have a French filmmaker who travels the world recording stuff, and who will end the first day, giving a live performance of all his work, like a kind of live VJ on tour. We'll have somebody present a paper on his work before, and then he will end the day with an art performance. And we'll have something on the other days as well. We have Mendel Kahlen, who I'm not sure if he's been on your podcast before.
I don't think he has. Yeah, we have to get him on. You're right.
You should. Yeah, he's a good friend of ours, and he's developed this amazing company, and he'll developing music for psychedelic therapy as psychedelic therapy, and he'll end the day also by including music, talking about the role of music in psychedelic therapy, but also giving people listening experiences to music. And for those interested, we also have a separate workshop, for people to go really into detail, having deep listening experiences and experiencing firsthand the power of music, just sober, just the impact of music and on your on your cognition, on your emotion. And we'll have, I don't know if you've seen this, David, but this is, for me, has been one of my favorite all-time documentaries on psychedelics, which came out last year. It's a Dutch filmmaker who made this beautiful movie called Descending the Mountain.
No, I haven't seen that.
Okay, so we'll screen the documentary, and we'll do an interview with a documentary maker. She made a documentary about a trial that they did in Zurich, in Switzerland, on long-term meditators and giving them psilocybin and seeing what changes in the way they experience meditation and vice versa, how their meditation influences their psychedelic experiences. And she was present for the sessions. And this is done by a Zen monk, a Swiss Zen monk on a mountain in Switzerland. And it's just a very gentle, beautiful documentary documenting really, really beautiful, profound, and also humbling experiences of these long-term, deep meditation practitioners. And it's just a very beautifully shot documentary that has very subtle, sometimes a lot of the psychedelic animation, the psychedelic visuals, the way that it's represented in film, it's very in your face. And in this documentary, there's a special magical touch to it that's done very subtly, but very effectively. And I think it's just a very, very touching documentary.
How many times have you seen it?
I've seen it twice since then, and I'm looking forward to watching it again, because it's a very touching documentary.
I can tell the way you're talking about you. It sounds like you really love it. Like it's very beautiful and meaningful. And I love that you're building experiential pieces into the conference. So it's not just talks and panels and kind of, because that's quite, cognitive and intellectual. So we also have bodies, and, you're a capoeirista, so you like to use your body doing to the berimbau. So it's great to bring that in, like the aesthetics piece, the music piece, the film piece, a meditative piece as well. I think it's really important that we emphasize those aspects. And I saw that on September 21st, as well as that kind of business day, there are 3 other workshops. If people want to kind of get there early before the conference starts, there's those 3 workshops on breathwork, psychotherapy and psychedelics, and then music with Mendel Kaelin, as you mentioned. So those look brilliant, and I would love to do all 3. But could you just tell people a wee bit about how that works with the workshops, how they sign up for it, and how that will work on the 21st of September?
Yeah, so the people can register through the website, which is icpr-conference.com, which I'm sure you'll include in the show notes also. But so they're discounted for people who also attend ICPR. And the one that's, I think, will be sold out relatively soon is the Psychotherapy with Psychedelics workshop, which is hosted by 3 facilitators. Janice Phelps, who runs the Psychedelic Therapy Center at CIIS in San Francisco. Bill Richards, who is, I think, the single person with the longest continuing experience or involvement in psychedelic research and treatment since the early 60s. We were doing an interview with him for ICPR, and I was looking up in my publications when his first publication was, and this was in '69. So it's over 50 years ago that he first published on psychedelics and their use in treating end-of-life anxiety. And then we also have Torsten Passi, who, as Bill Richards, studied with Hans Karl Leuner, who was a not as well-known figure in the field of psychedelic therapy, but like an important pioneer in Europe, as Stan Grof was in the development of psycholytic therapy. So we have these 3 powerhouses giving a full-day workshop on how to be or to become and remain a good, grounded psychedelic therapist. And I think that's we did one with Janice and Torsten in 2020 online because we were unable to do it in person, and that was already a magnificent, very instructive workshop. But to do it in a small group, intimately, with all 3 of them there live, I think is going to be really special.
Wow!
And then so that's, it's. I agree with you. I'm also I would want to attend all 3 of them, and also the Science, Ethics, and Business Symposium. So it's going to be hard to choose, but the other one will have one half-day workshop on breathwork, giving people a sense of what altered states of consciousness are like without the use of substances, just using your breath, and how to envelop that, how to create a container for that, and how to understand that. And really the same is true for the music, using not your breath, but using music to induce specific therapeutic states and experiences, and how that can be harnessed optimally in therapy with or without psychedelics. So those are also more experiential workshops, and those are the day before the conference. And to wrap up the conference, we'll be organizing a really, really nice after party on Saturday night. This is the main reason we actually switched from Friday to Sunday to this time doing it Thursday to Saturday, just so we have a chance for everybody who's been at the conference to come together and then have a party and, have a beer, have a drink, just interact with people without, feeling the need or the pressure to attend another lecture because you're there. Yeah. And I think for me, at least, this is what conferences are about. They're about connecting and networking and meeting new people and, getting new insights and new ideas. And not all of that comes through going to lectures and watching everything that you can.
Yeah, beautiful. Oh, it sounds amazing. And I'm interested that you're talking about music so much and aesthetics as well, because I checked out online some of the photos of the venue. It's Philharmonie Concert Hall in Amsterdam, and it's a really beautiful building. I think you've been there before for the conference, but it just looks incredible. Like, just thinking of the architecture and the acoustics as well. It's an amazing place.
It is thanks for reminding me. Yeah, it's a beautiful place. And so there like the main hall, which fits like 1,100 people. It's a proper a music hall. It has a massive organ on the stage. But the smaller room, which fits about 400 people, I think it's the place that has the best acoustics of all concert halls in the Netherlands. It's like curved wooden panels on the interior, so it's optimally designed for great acoustics. And yeah, like having music there will be a really special experience.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. I want to just double check anything that we didn't get to talk about that you want to tell folks about, Joost.
Yeah. So one thing I think we haven't touched upon yet, because I've mentioned lectures, but we'll have very important panel discussions, which are much more interactive than just, lectures are one directional for the most part. Maybe you'll get to ask a question or two or three at the end, but that's about it. But the panel discussions that we've programmed are really about, interacting with the audience, interacting with people from different perspectives about, how to design studies around psychedelics, for example. Does the placebo controlled clinical trial, is that really the best fit for psychedelic studies? Because blinding is a problem in psychedelic research. It's a problem in psychopharmacology in general, but like especially in psychedelics, because most people getting the psychedelic, unless it's a very low dose, they will know in which condition they are. And the same is probably true for people who are in a controlled condition. So are there different ways of conducting clinical studies with psychedelics? And there's no clear answer that I found yet, but there are some smart people thinking about this, and we're putting a bunch of them together in a panel and having a really in-depth, geeky, but very important discussion about, methodology of setting up trials, of setting up studies. And also what I find super interesting is this, Tessin Noorani is dubbed the Michael Pollan effect. And I'm sure you've noticed this at Psychedelics Today as well. I think most people who've been in the psychedelic field have noticed this. There's an uptick, a noticeable uptick of people interested in psychedelics after Michael Pollan's first book came out. And I think actually, talking about Michael Pollan, I think today he's releasing today is the 12th of July as we're recording this, he's releasing the Netflix series on how to change your mind. So it's a huge cultural influence. Yeah. Which means that people will not be without any expectations what psychedelics are about. They have a sense of what psychedelics may be about or what they should be about, and how those expectations influence people's experiences is it's an important factor in controlling in psychedelic studies. And I think what we have touched upon a little bit already are issues around scaling psychedelic therapy. Now, how do you train all these therapists once psychedelics become registered? How do you certify the trainings? Yeah. How do you ensure that all the bodies, all the professional associations of psychiatrists, of nurse practitioners, of psychotherapists, clinical psychologists, how do you bring them all on board, and how you make sure that these developments can land in a safe and sustainable way? I think that's really important. And also, risks around psychedelic therapy, discussions around ethics, boundary transgressions, as we've seen in the highly publicized case of Richard Jensen and Donna Dreyer with the MAPS, MDMA assisted psychotherapy. Mm-hmm. How can we prevent and mitigate those incidents, which may occur in any kind of therapy, but I think people under the influence of psychedelics and in altered states of consciousness are especially vulnerable and fragile. And what can we do to make sure that you have professional accountability? It's another panel that I'm personally really looking forward to. It's a difficult discussion to have, but I think it's important to have it and to be transparent about the risks and to be open about that. And to tag on to that, I think and this will have a prominent place in our conference, is the patient perspective. So how do patients feel about this? Because you cannot talk about these things and then just have clinicians and academic experts, but you need to bring the patients on board as well, right? They have a voice in this. And there's an organization that was started recently in the UK called Psypan, the Psychedelic Participant Advocacy Network. So they're trying to bring in the patient perspective a little bit more prominently in these discussions. So we'll be sure to talk about that as well. And then, okay, to wrap up, maybe a topic that I always have discussions about because I told you, right, I'm a philosopher. I work at the University Department of Psychiatry, and I am personally convinced that in order to be an effective therapist, you need to have experience with the substance that you're prescribing. You need to understand the terrain that people are navigating through, the patients are navigating through.
Yeah.
But then, and this is a difficult enough discussion to have with people who come from a more mainstream background. And then, if you do think, like, provided that you think that self-experience is important as a therapist, as a novice, maybe an experienced therapist, but if you're a novice in psychedelic therapy, is having one experience enough? And if not, how many is enough? And do you need to have a difficult experience as well? If you have 3 positive experiences that go in a specific direction, do you run the risk of imposing your own experiences on how you interpret patient experiences? And if that's not the case, and how do you make sure that you stay, open-minded and you don't impose your own value system or your own way of understanding the world on patients, which is important for therapists anyway. But there are special dimensions to this in the psychedelic therapy realm that I think are really important to discuss, and just to discuss more openly between proponents, and between people who have a more neutral perspective. But these kinds of discussions that they're all important and they're all complicated, but they're all super interesting to have, and to have them in person, I think.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of having panels as well. It enables different perspectives to kind of work together, and those conversations, they're works in progress. Like, we don't have an answer to them. We don't have a model that fits perfectly together. We have to build it. And so we have to have a number of different opinions sharing their perspectives, and the patient experience is really key. And again, I hate to kind of criticize money and capitalism, but if money was there, they would tend to say, we've got the best protocol, we've got the best medicine, we've got the best clinic, we've got the best retreat center. And almost like they already have the answers, and we don't have the answers. We've got some great questions, complicated questions, but we need everyone to talk about it, because we're all part of building this together. So those workshops sound amazing. There's one other thing that you haven't mentioned, and that is tea, coffee, and vegetarian lunch is provided. Correct?
Yes, that is very true. Yes, indeed.
And for an Englishman, oh my God, if I've been to a conference, there was no tea, no coffee, no water. And I literally was getting a little bit anxious, because I do literally get anxious if I don't have tea to drink all day, just herbal tea, And so having that there, it just means you can just hang out with people, go get a tea, coffee, lunch is going to be there. You haven't got to worry about it. You can just chill and just really be in that space together. And I love that it's vegetarian too. So kudos to the team for making that happen, to be honest, because it adds another layer of complexity to it, but it just makes the whole experience just flow. Thanks
for agreeing with me on that. But that's the reason we do it, because it allows you to stay in the space. You don't need to think about it. And I mean, people travel from all over the world, really, they come from all continents to attend the conference. And if you don't have to think about where to go next during your breaks, you don't have to rush out. You can just hang out and, go into more depth with the people you just met about the topic that you just listened to. That's super valuable, I think.
One other quick question. Sorry to keep you here, but before we press record, and I was saying, why can't I come? And some of the reasons is that just because I've got 2 little kids and I love them more than anything, and my wife as well, I should say. And it makes it hard to go to conferences. And my wife and I went to the From Research to Reality conference. We brought the kids with us. And my sister-in-law came and kind of she babysat for a couple of the days and a couple of the evenings as well, just to make it happen. And so we were thinking to ourselves, my wife and I, what if conferences had childcare as an optional extra? They're like a room or a floor or a different area where there's, activities for kids and childcare for kids, and it's safe and done in the right way. I don't know if that conversation ever happened with your team, because I know if that was happening, I might be able to swing it, to be honest. And I think other parents as well, it is so hard to have these immersive experiences and to really, devote a whole day or a couple of days, and to have kids. And you've got a couple of kids yourself around the same age. So
I do, yeah.
So maybe answer that, like, how are you going to handle having your two little kids and these kind of 4 days of the conference? And how can other parents just make this happen more easily?
That's such a great question. Yeah, it's a reality. It's a reality indeed. I think my attendance of conferences has decreased substantially in the years since I've had kids. And I interestingly, the previous live conference that we did in 2016, my wife was very highly pregnant. This was a month before our daughter was born, 6 years ago. And since then, it's been a little bit more complicated. But it's a great idea. I don't think I've seen this at conferences. I've seen some conferences where people brought their kids, and I don't think it was always a fantastic experience. But because for kids, it's probably very boring. And if kids, start to cry or whine, I mean, that's not a great experience for other people. Anybody who's been in an airplane with a crying child can attest to this. But it's honestly a good idea, and I don't think I've ever considered this, and I think it might be a little bit too late to put it together for this one.
Yeah,
but maybe we should be in touch, and I see if I can arrange something for you. Because my parents will be with the kids in our place for the duration of the conference. So they'll go to school and they go to daycare, but my parents will be there to go to pick them up and to take them there. And I know it's not an option for everybody. Yeah. But at least for us, this time it allows us to organize the conference and to be fully present there, because, having to juggle both things at the same time, it's a challenge.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it's great having it in your hometown so you can rely on your parents for that. Okay, so let's see what we can do. You heard it here, folks. Parent-friendly psychedelic conferences. All right, so I guess, Joost, if you want to just tell folks again the dates of the conference and where they can find out more information.
Yes, thank you, David. Yeah, so the conference, the Interdisciplinary Conference on Psychedelic Research, Icpr, in short, will take place from the 21st to the 24th of September, 2022, in Haarlem, which is a little city next to Amsterdam. We promote it as Amsterdam because people will know Amsterdam, but it's just right next door. It's a 20-minute or 15-minute train ride. It's a beautiful historical city. The conference takes place in a beautiful historical building as well, as we've talked about. So the first day will be science, ethics, and business, and 3 different workshops. And then the conference itself will take place from the 22nd to the 24th. And we'll have an after party, and listeners to the Psychedelics Today podcast will get a special discount, which I'm sure you'll share in the show notes, because I don't have the discount coupon.
The code is at 150 euros off, and it's today 150.
Today 150. Okay, for 150 euros off, that's a pretty generous discount, if I might say so myself.
Yeah, your team did approve it.
And I think it's worth it, folks. It's a special conference, and I look forward to welcoming as many of you that want to come as possible.
Wonderful talking to you, and the conference sounds amazing. Really important that you're having those conversations and you're bringing those people together, and you're doing it in such a special place in a beautiful way with such good principles and ethical vision about how this should play out. And that's how we want the whole ecosystem to grow, in this same kind of way. Like, it's not just let's have this tiny little conference and do it in a really good way, but then the whole ecosystem is going to build in this hyper capitalist way. Let's actually kind of set the standards here. This is how it can work, bringing all these voices, narratives, perspectives together.
Yeah, because I mean, all these developments, they don't take place in a vacuum. They take place in the real world too, and it has repercussions for the real world too, outside of academia and outside of clinical research. And I think that's why it's super important to have these discussions and then to continue discussions afterwards as well.
Beautiful. Amen. So if I don't see you, I will hopefully see you soon.
I'm sure
but the rest of the team are going to be there. Yeah, I'm thinking about it. Let's see. But if I don't make it, the rest of the team will be there. Joe and Kyle will be there. And it's just been a real pleasure. So thanks for listening, everyone. This has been David Drapkin speaking to Joost Breeksema from Icpr. God bless everyone. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to that. I hope you enjoyed it. I really did. And you may be able to tell that as the podcast kind of went on and on, I started to get more excited about, maybe I can come to this conference. You know what? I might try and do it. You can tell, like, it just sounds so good. I'm kind of being convinced by Joost. So I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to kind of swing it, but yeah, Joe and Kyle and Johanna's going to be there. It should be fantastic. So if you can, I really recommend it. I think it's going to be a special time, to be honest. Special place, special people. And yeah, it's going to be really cool. So thanks again for listening. And if you haven't liked or subscribed to our podcast yet, please do. Go to all of our social media channels that you like to frequent, because we're constantly putting out kind of events and news and quotes and great podcasts that we're putting out. You can also listen to our backlog on our website, psychedelicstoday.com, or check out our blogs as well we have there. Or even you can subscribe to our bi-weekly newsletter, Keeping Tabs, through our main website. We've also got another website for all of our training courses. That is called psychedelicEducationCenter.com. And there's about a dozen there you can get either for free or for very cheap, or for a couple that are more expensive. And we're just launching our new Navigating Psychedelics course, 9 weeks of live group work starting in September. So you can go to psychedelicEducationCenter.com to check that out. All right, everybody, wherever in the world you are, be well, and we'll take care.